the point along the way. But one of the points I'm also trying to make in this book is that, we are all the product. We think of ourselves as self-made. We are, but we also the product of like decisions that people made before we were born, things that happened to people before we were born, decisions that were made for other people before we were born. Because like, so me, the only reason and then you just learn a lot about yourself and your ability to put all these stories together and then seeing what they wind up saying about you. And it's funny. And to me, that's also the best way to hit the target. Because if I had said to myself, I'm self-consciously aiming to write a story about Black American resilience and write a story that's a love letter to Black America, the story wouldn't have read as well. It's just the fact that I told these stories and you hit that target along the way. So like all these things that like the big message you're looking to send in a story, you send it a lot better if you don't try to send it. Just write the best story and that message will come out along the way.
Hello, viewers. Welcome to another beautiful episode of the Nana Yayabwa podcast. Today, I have a special guest, Morgan Campbell, CBC Sports senior contributor. He is a veteran journalist and author of My Fighting Family, Borders and Bloodlines, and the Battles That Made Us. His work has shaped conversations about race, sports, and identity. And we are excited to dive into his journey. Morgan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nana Yayabwa.
Yes.
Great to meet you. You taught me how to pronounce it. I spit it right back at you.
Thank you. It is a pleasure. The question I love asking in the beginning is, what motivated you to say yes to this invite?
One is that, especially now in 2025, given the political climate and given the fact that you have a president of the United States that has said, essentially, regardless of his buzzwords, the message he's sending and by his actions, that they want to whitewash the federal government, whitewash history, close down these different avenues for Black folks and other people of color to work, to thrive, to express ourselves. That's what they want to do. And that's sort of a directive that comes down from the president, but you see these private companies doing that sort of preemptively. But you also see companies in Canada doing that. I'm like, this is the federal government in the United States issuing these directives. That has nothing to do with what a private enterprise in Canada should do. But I see, Shopify getting rid of their department that was focused on elevating Black entrepreneurs. So I see what they're doing. So instead of just like sitting back and letting racists have their way all the time, there are different ways to fight back. And one, I would be doing this anyway, but two, I'm even more motivated just to help out, cooperate, help elevate other Black voices where I can, because I know these other folks are trying to shut us all down. And they can do what they want to do, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do, which is network with other Black people. We're going to build each other up and we're going to resist. And that's that. So that's a big part of it. And then two, I love talking about my book, just like any other author, because your book is only selling when you're talking about your book, unless you're famous and other people can talk about your book for you. But, part of it was, my book's been out for 13 months now. So I learned a lot of marketing lessons in year one that I'm applying in year two. So I'm just a lot more aggressive and intentional about marketing the book, which means saying yes to almost every podcast, unless like if Fox News comes to me and says, can you come on our podcast? I'll be like, no. But again, a Black creator from Toronto. Again, I was going to do that anyway, but also especially now, given this really organized campaign against Black voices, against Blackness, against Black history, I ain't laying down to take that, and if another Black person is out here trying to make it happen, and I'm in a position to help, and we're in a position to help each other, and that's what we're going to do.
Yes. And a big thank you. when I started a podcast, like I shared with you, it was about storytelling, the power in storytelling, and us telling our own stories from our own, experiences. And that's why I love your book. I haven't finished it, but the little I have, as much as one third or that I've
Okay.
gone through, it's like, okay, you are speaking to me. You were speaking to me like when I first came to Canada, the challenges I went through. Those that helped me navigate were people that have already been here. So
Hmm.
that would be like people just like yourself or
Hmm.
your parents who were already accustomed to here, to break things down, to make me
Yes.
understand that ABC is what you're going through.
Yes.
If you are going to act or react, this is how the best way to go about it. So
Hmm.
that is why I really, really, I picked it up and I couldn't put it down, and I still have it. I still have it.
Yay! Well, you said
It's
you're on page 81. It gets spicier from there. It's
oh
the
my
action's really starting to pick
goodness.
up.
Oh, well, I did see some family drama emerging with your father, and it's, you see a woman's mind where it's going. I pick
Yes.
and choose the ones that's like, ooh,
Yes.
who is this woman that your hands are touching and your fingers are going through the navel and the kids are
Oh,
playing in the background?
yeah. Well, I don't want to. I don't want to
So
give away the whole book, but yeah. But part of it is how marriages work and how marriages don't work.
work,
And my
yes,
dad. I love my dad. He's a very dedicated father. But he's not a very good husband. Um, and you'll read that in the book. My
yes,
dad had a lot of regrets over that.
yes.
But yeah, there's a lot.
In the midst of it, the question is, was it worth it? But the other thing as well, we'll delve into the questions. The other thing as well, I was kind of wondering, at what age, how old was your father during that time?
Oh, so the chapter you're talking about, yeah, my dad would have been like early 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's this thing that happens with menopause when men try to figure out whether they still got their youthfulness.
Yes. Am I
so,
still
so
am I still good looking?
am
Yes.
I still good looking? Do I still have it? Does my wife
Yes.
see it? If my wife doesn't see it, somebody else sees it
Yes.
outside. So around that age, many times you have marriages crumbling because
Yes.
men are trying to figure out and find themselves. So I was reading into the psychology of everything happening. It's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I try to keep that in mind, and like for men, to the men listening that are in their 40s,
Mhm.
uh, for the most part, guys, we are not that physically attractive anymore, man. Just deal with it. You're not as good
Yes.
looking as you were at 22. That's just what it is. And the woman that you think is checking you out, 99 times out of 100, she's not.
Yes.
Unless she really has a reason to.
Hmm.
But like there was this, every now and then you'll hear about a guy getting like seduced and like robbed, seduced and drugged
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
But then this is on the guys to figure out, listen, man, if a woman is coming to you and acting like she got to sleep with you tonight and you're not famous, you're a mark. You're not that good looking. You're not that attractive. Okay? Just calm down.
Calm down, hold
You're
your
not,
horses.
yes.
Calm down, hold your horses.
No. There might have been a time in my life when they were, but they ain't chasing me like
Yes.
that anymore. You just got to deal with it, accept it.
There's a lot of life lessons in this book. We're going to go into that at a certain point. Um, so let's come back to you, to roots and identity. So your book, right? It delves into your family history,
Hmm.
particularly from Southside Chicago to Toronto
Yeah.
in the late '60s. Yeah. So just briefly, for people who haven't picked up the book yet and are yet to pick up the book, what drove your family to make such a big transition, and how did it shape your upbringing?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of that question first,
Yeah.
because my family is from the South Side of Chicago,
Mhm.
um, and we are African American. And so when I say that, I mean that specifically, literally, that we are African American. Because what happens in Canada, or at least in Toronto, where so many of the Black folks are not from North America,
Mhm.
and you tell folks that your parents are from Chicago, and everyone's like, well, what about their parents? And I say, well, their parents, two of my grandparents are from Chicago and two are from down south.
Yes.
Okay, well, what about their parents? And they keep asking, waiting for me to say Jamaica, waiting for me to say Trinidad, something like that. No, my family is African American. Like for as many generations back as we can count, we've been on U.S. soil, and before that, we were from Africa. And that's just what it is. We are an African American family. and so, but there are not a ton of African Americans in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Besides people that play for the Raptors or the Argos or whatever.
Yes, yes,
But
yes.
so and then the next logical question I get is, well, why are they here? How did y'all get here? And the way we got here is that my grandfather, my mom's dad, was a musician,
Mm-hmm.
and he was from Chicago. He used to play all over, and then he started getting booked in Toronto. He was actually very reluctant to come to Toronto, uh, and my grandmother just finally talked him into it. She said, "Quit being a baby. You play everywhere else. Just go
Yeah.
to Toronto. You don't got to stay forever. If you like it, you like it. If you don't have to go back." And he came here in the late winter of 1966, and he fell in love with the place. And so the next time they booked him up here, he brought my grandmother, then he brought my youngest uncle, because he was the youngest of their kids. He was the only one that was still living at home. And then by the end of that summer, they had moved up here. So my parents were still in Chicago. They had just gotten married. They were thinking about having kids, but it was a very turbulent time, right?
Yes.
You had, the civil rights movement turning like very militant. Not that in and of itself is a bad thing, but there's just a lot of turmoil, a lot of turbulence. There's riots in Chicago. There's riots in Newark. There's riots in Detroit. There's a Vietnam War, which for people of their generation, born in the 1940s, that was a big deal because these are their peers getting drafted and sent to Vietnam to go fight. These are their peers, their friends, people they grew up with coming back, either not coming back at all, coming back in body bags, coming back injured. And so they had to think long and hard about having kids in the U.S. because what they didn't want was to have kids, and that kid turns 18, you get that letter from the government saying you got to join the army, you got to go to this other country and fight some poor people on a rich country's behalf, right? So they didn't want to do that. And so after the 1968 election, when Richard Nixon won, my parents were like, well, that's it. That's the last straw. Because if these people think Richard Nixon, this racist con man, sort of like today, a racist con man president, what are we doing here? So then they followed my grandparents to Toronto, and then that's where my sisters and I were all born. So in terms of how that shaped my identity, in a lot of ways, I'm very Canadian. In a lot of ways, I'm very American. I'm very comfortable with being both.
Yeah.
When I say American, I'm Black American. I'm African American. So like all this stuff that white Americans are into, this xenophobia, this sort of self-sabotaging bigotry. That's not what I grew up with. These aren't the traditions I grew up with. These aren't the people my people vote for, because Black people overwhelmingly vote against that.
Yes.
Right. And so what I'm grateful for now as an adult is that my parents raised me connected to Black America. We were always going back to Chicago, Grand Rapids, Buffalo. And so my Blackness, my African Americanness is not an abstract notion to me. You see people like maybe their grandfather, especially if they're raised outside the U.S. I'm like, oh, I acknowledge my African American heritage, but I'm not. I acknowledge my African American heritage guy. Like you asked me, I'm Black. I'm Black American. My people are from down south. That's who we are. I just happen to have been raised way up north. But like again, we were connected because we were always going back, and I really appreciate that. But also, there's enough room in me for like a very Canadian identity too. So like when they were playing hockey last week, Canada versus U.S., like I wasn't cheering for the U.S. Are you nuts? Why would I cheer for a team that Donald Trump cheers for? No, doing this. No, I'm cheer for Canada because in Canada, no, in a lot of ways, Canada's a racist country, like most countries are, where most of the people are white. But what Canada has is free healthcare, and that's a big thing. And one of the reasons the United States has never been able to sign off on universal healthcare is because white people don't want it because they know Black people will get it. And white Americans are so paranoid about Black people getting something for free that they will gladly live without something that could help everyone because they don't want Black people to have it. And so this is one of the big differences between the two countries, right? But there's enough room in my identity for both. Because just like having a mother and a father, you are of both of these people. So I'm of both of these countries.
Oh, geez, you've answered my next question. I was going to ask you about dual identity, but you've answered it before I even and so let's get back to your book, My Fighting Family. It's
yes.
As much as I've read and I've listened to a few interviews here and there, it suggests really resilience. Resilience is the key aspect of it. Well, you got to be resilient if you're fighting family and other people
Yes. Yeah.
and karate chopping at wedding.
Yes. Yeah.
So, what does fighting mean in your family story? And was it, how do we call it? Both literal, figurative, or both?
Yes. Yeah. And so,
So what happened with the Jamaican guy? Did that? They didn't go
oh no, they had a real fight.
boxing. They had a
No, that was not boxing. That was a fist fight just on the street. Just to get your readers caught up. Not too.
yes.
I'll tell you that. I'll tell the readers this, not to spoil everything, but the
Yeah.
book is called My Fighting Family because, there are a lot of the type of family squabbles that every family is sort of familiar with.
Yes.
And the way I explain it to people is this: if you read this book and you'll see like my mom's dad, my dad's mom, and most people, it doesn't matter what your background is.
Mm-hmm.
Most people can look at their family and be like, I recognize that person that's in the middle of every fight, that person
Yes.
that wants attention, that
Yes.
person that if a fight doesn't involve them, they will get involved and make it worse just because they got to be at the center of attention, and they like to fight, they like trouble, they like drama. And if you can look at your family, most of us can look at their family and identify that person.
Mm-hmm.
If you cannot identify that person,
Mm-hmm.
you are probably that person. You need to check yourself and ask yourself how many fights you've been in. Did you make them? Did you try to resolve them, or did you try to make them
What if I'm the
worse?
one that runs away from all the fights
Well,
because it's too stressful? I
yeah,
don't want
but
to listen. I don't want to be part of it. But it keeps coming.
but you could be the person that's positioned to write the book, though, right? Because you're the person a little bit detached, watching it all unfold and seeing the effect it has on people. So in one sense, it's about the fights we get in as families.
Mm-hmm.
Literally, there's a bunch of fist fights in the book. It's a little bit like a kung fu movie because there's fist fights. That I can think of at least three. That keep the plot moving. And then there's the fight that we all have to make space for ourselves as Black people in Canada
Yes.
and in the U.S. The fight that Black people we have to wage against interpersonal racism, against systemic racism, and then the fight we just all have as individuals to grow, to learn, to accept our mistakes, to move past regret, and to figure out like how marriages work, how marriages don't, and this fight too to like learn how to love people that you don't necessarily like. That's a fight.
Yes.
Learn how to empathize with people who are not empathetic. That's a fight. That's a struggle. So yeah, so the phrase fighting works on a few levels at the same time.
Levels,
Yes.
It's not just fighting, it's deeper than
Yes.
what we geez. Okay. Oh, you mentioned empathy and it's like my brains go somewhere because it's one of those things you teach in soft skills, and having a nursing background, it's one of those things I always have to teach when I'm training new nurses or preceptoring these young nurses to always have empathy. What does it mean? How do you apply it? Because we are in a generation whereby that is almost out of the window, or it is out of the window as per our conversation on say Donald Trump, the U.S. president. Empathy is out of the window. Attacking individuals, castigating, and just cause mass chaos all over the world, not only to us here. But we are going to tell our story because we can and we will. And no matter how long our stories as Black people, both, Africans on the continent and in the diaspora, generations over have been told, as at one point, Blacks on the continent thought they were better than Blacks, our brothers and sisters that were enslaved in the Americas, and then vice versa. If you're in the Caribbean, you are lucky that you were taken, you were shown the light.
And meanwhile we're all under somebody's heel, know.
Yes. And so for me, when I came to Canada and I got to understand, I realized the need for me to really also understand my history from Ghana, in Ghana, and how to bridge it and break that, how to bridge it and pull us together rather than divide us. So conversations like this are a bridging for me. So I hope my viewers listening, both here in Canada, in the US, in England, in Ghana, in Nigeria, or parts of Africa, wherever you are at, to understand that this is a bridging conversation from old history to now. We have to find ourselves, come together as a family, and repair. It will take years, but
Yes.
still repair those, intricate um, injuries that have been meted on us.
Yeah, like I don't play diaspora wars, you know.
Yeah.
Um and some people, especially when they find out my family's American, they try to draw me into that. You guys have no culture. Okay, but say whatever you want. One, I'm not going to argue with it because it's not true.
Yes.
And Black American culture, I say this all the time, is the most pervasive culture on the
Yes.
planet that has not been spread by gunpoint. Like any other place in the world where people speak English outside of English, because the English went there and with guns said, "We own this land now. You're speaking our language."
Yes.
Right? We don't have a choice about speaking English, right? On
Yes.
this continent. But like
Yes.
everywhere in the world, people picking up on Black American slang, trying to speak AAVE everywhere in the
Yes.
world. And Black
Yes.
Americans have not gone anywhere and forced our language, forced our culture on people. People just dig it, right? And I just don't. I so all that said, I still will get people who are not African American. Maybe they're from the Caribbean, maybe they're from Africa, trying to look down on me because I'm African American and trying to draw me into these diaspora war debates. And I'm just like, listen, you can have it if you feel that way. Feel that way. I mean, I think you're wrong, but like, I'm not going to argue with you over this because the thing I look for is, and what fascinates me is, how these different cultures have survived and transformed throughout the diaspora. And,
Yes.
and and it's the same thing when I meet someone from Latin America and they look at me and like, oh, you're not very dark, you're not Black. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe in your country I'm not Black, but where I come from, I'm Black. So when I come here, I identify with the Black people. Like, don't think you're giving me a promotion, like you're doing me a favor by calling me something besides Black. Listen, I'm Black. Whatever promotion you're trying to give me, oh, tú eres mulato, tú eres halal, whatever. That's but yeah, I don't need it. Where the Black people at? Because that's the team I'm on. You know what I'm saying? And so, but it is
But
fascinating how like different, like you listen to, if you speak another language, if you speak Spanish, you listen to like Afro-Cubans, so like some of the sayings they have and how
yes.
similar they are to the things that like
Yes.
Black Americans say in English, right?
Yes.
Like that's what's fascinating to me, and that's the team I'm on. I'm not on team I'm better than you because the slave ship came to Charleston instead of to Kingston. Like
Mm-hmm.
that makes no difference to me. That does
Mm-hmm.
not put me above you.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I was in university, it was this guy. His family was from Barbados, and he was trying to pull rank on the Black American kids. He's like, "Well, at least my people never picked cotton." I'm like, "My man, you're from Barbados. Your people cut sugar cane. Your people grew rice. What is the difference? What is the difference? It ain't no difference. Stop this." So anyway, that's where I'm coming from. Sorry, I'm off on a tangent, but
No, it's very true, and these are part of the critical conversations we need to have amongst ourselves, because it's mainly based on ignorance and lack of a true understanding of
mhm.
history. That's
Yes.
where I find. So I will give you this synopsis. When I started, and I got one lady saying, "Oh, you sold us out," and I said,
Mhm.
"Imagine my ancestry, right? There is a father, there is a mother, there are 3 or 4 children. At night, they are sitting in front of their hut, they are eating. Slave raiders come. Father is taken to Jamaica, mother is taken to the US, children are split around the world.
Mhm.
And one is left. One tries and runs away and is left in Ghana. Okay.
Mhm.
So the one in Ghana eventually grows up, marries, have children. There is another one in, say, the father is in Jamaica, used as a quote unquote breeder,
Mhm.
breeds more children. Mom is also equally used as a breeder, breeds more other children. So you have children left in Ghana, you have
Mhm.
children in extra children in the US, extra children in Jamaica, and wherever else that the other children were taken, if they survived. So this family, which was rooted in Africa, is split
Mhm.
apart. There's still part of the root in Africa because one got away. It's
Mhm.
rooted there. So aren't these people cousins?
Yes. 100%. Yes.
So these are distant cousins. As we're sitting here, I wouldn't know if you and I, for instance, are distant cousins.
Yes. Yeah.
So when I explain that way, it's like, oh, I said yes. So we got to understand that there are our families are out there through no. They didn't go by choice. It was by force.
Yes. Yeah, I'm also not in the business of blaming Black people for slavery. Even the Black people that owned and traded slaves, because this is just the system that they were handed. And this was still the system that they lived under. And so, and those, like any Black person in Africa that traded slaves, like, did they come out ahead in the end, or were they still under some white person's boot? You know?
That is true. That is
so,
true. So
I don't judge people based on like today's values, you know, and the way we see race, because we had to go through a lot to get to
where we
the point of view we have today. Yes.
We needed to. I'll say I'm glad I come from a country that values Pan-Africanism.
Yes.
And have these dialogues, because Ghana wouldn't be as independent and open as it is if not for the likes of Maya Angelou, MLK, and what is this other guy's
Malcolm
name?
X.
Malcolm X, yes, and the Garveys and whatnot.
Yes.
They influenced our president then to see. And that's how we became who we are. And that's how the country is still open to that. And there are staunch Pan-Africanists who have not even gotten out of the country, but they do understand the true value of us coming together. On that note,
yes.
On that note, because two storytellers together will take us different.
Yes.
Oh. So let's go to sports journalism.
Let's do it.
Yes. So what initially drew you to sports journalism, and what have been some of the defining moments in your journey, in your career?
Okay, so I'll answer the first part of the question first.
Okay, before you answer, let me throw something that is not even relevant. So last night, my colleague and I were Googling you up, and she printed this out.
Oh, like, where'd you find that picture?
Well, it's online.
Yeah.
And it's like full speed ahead, sports.
Yes.
And so it's like, who is he? Which one is he? And I pointed you out, and it's like, oh, look at those muscles.
Yeah, it's when I was 18. And again, like, to connect to what we were talking about earlier on, I don't look like that anymore. I'm not that good looking anymore.
So we were admiring. It's like, yes, okay, when we get him on, we'll figure out if it's still there or not.
No.
Apparently it's not.
But there is a whole chapter in my book about that picture, about the story leading up to that picture and the story behind that picture.
Okay.
So you're asking how I got into sports journalism. It's funny.
Yes.
When I was probably about 8 or 9 years old, my parents got me a subscription to Sports Illustrated. I don't even remember asking for it. I think they did it just because it was a way to get me into reading as a habit, you know, because books were boring, but like I liked sports. So if I liked the picture on the cover, I would start reading. And that's sort of where the seed was planted before I even really knew it, you know? And then I went to university. I went to journalism school. And in the late 1990s, it was actually really hard for me to break into sports journalism because I had played football in university. So you would think that would make it easier to get into sports journalism because you played a sport at a high level. But what would happen is when I was at school, like I didn't write in the sports section at the school newspaper because I was an athlete. So there's just too many conflicts of interest there. So I'd write about other stuff. But then when I got out of school and was trying to get sports writing jobs, all these recruiters would just laugh at me and they say, well, where's your sports writing clips? I was like, well, I know how to write and I know about sports. I can put them together. It's not that difficult. And they would tell me how complex it was to write about sports. And if you haven't been doing this since you were 6 years old, there's no way you could catch up, which was a lie. But, you know, I got a break here and there. I got a break about a year out of school, about a half a year out of school. I got a job at an internet magazine in Boston, but they covered high school sports. And then when I started my first internship with the Toronto Star, I started in the sports section. And that's really where I started to find myself as a sports writer. And I was back and forth between departments for a while. But what I always liked about sport, as a way to tell stories is that sport is sort of a language of its own. And so, like, when I talk about different languages, I speak Spanish. I kind of understand French, but in the context of sport, I'm a lot better at Spanish and a lot better at French, right?
Yeah.
But also, sport is a way you can use sport to get into bigger conversations about race or politics or business. Or you can look at race or politics or business and see how they affect sports. That's sort of a two-way street, but sport is such a convenient door to open to get people who wouldn't normally read a story about, I don't know, what it's like to escape Cuba and come to the United States through Canada, or come to the United States through Panama or something like that. They might not normally read that story, but if it's about their favorite baseball player and how he made that journey, they'll read it. So that's what I always enjoyed about sport, was just a way to introduce people to ideas that they would never have thought about before. And things that people are interested in that they didn't know they were interested in, because they just thought they were interested in baseball. But then you read about this guy taking a speedboat to Mexico and then going from Mexico to some camp where the Major League Scouts come find him. Now all of a sudden they are interested in Cuban-American relations and how people find themselves over here when they started over there. So that's what I always liked about sports and sports writing.
It's amazing when you speaking about that Ngannou, the Cameroonian guy.
Yes.
Yeah. His story was just popping in my head that I never really paid attention to him. I just saw him fighting, but then later on, when I heard him start speaking, telling his story, it highlighted the challenges even up north in Libya for people trying to cross. And so the things we often do not pay attention to, the nuances, but are they nuanced or they are actually big deals? And I think you found a perfect way to bring it to light. Thank you.
Hey, that's why I make the medium-sized bucks,
Thank you, because even with I forget the title of the book, with basketball in the US and it being big business. I think somebody wrote about it being the new slave.
Oh, $40 million slaves.
Yes, $40 million slaves. I have the book somewhere.
Yes.
I have no idea where it is. Yeah. And it's like, wow, I haven't read the book, but I bought it to read it, but I never got to it. But just the idea that sort of slavery has changed in its form, and Black people are being still used in a different way.
Our bodies are still the commodities. Yes. And like a lot of football players, like American football, will complain about it because on the way into the league, when they're leaving university and they got to go to this big event where basically they got to do all these physical tests, they got to run, they got to lift weights, they got to jump. But there's a part of it where they basically got to walk out in their underwear while all these old white men look at them, right? Look at their body. They do everything but check the teeth, right? But this is, and to a lot of the Black players, they're like, yeah, this feels a little bit like a slave auction.
It feels like it is. It is.
Right. But that's it's even that world is evolving, especially American football, because American football is incredibly expensive to play, but it still winds up in a lot of high schools as taxpayer subsidized. But at the same time, again, with this administration, like their relentless attack on public schools is going to dry up a big source of their football talent. But that's why the NFL, they're also like trying to get Germans to play football, trying to get Samoans to play football, trying to get people in Africa to play football because they're going to run out of people in America.
I was about to say that. I know one of them is in Ghana trying to get them into football and whatnot. Wow.
Well, if you look at an NFL roster, well, think about the fact that like there's a lot of West Africans like in Dallas and in Houston. You look at NFL rosters and you see a lot of these names.
Adai. There was an Adai.
Joseph Adai, yep.
Yes, Joseph Adai. You know why his name stuck? Because my son is Joseph Adai.
Yeah. Oh, what was the guy's name that used to play for the Argos? It was hyphenated, but the first last name was Owusu.
Okay.
But there's a lot of those in the
Yes.
NFL. You see like a lot of Yoruba names. You see a lot of Igbo names,
Yes.
right?
Yes. 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 Yes.
And
Yes.
but it's because a lot of their parents came to the U.S. but
Came.
came to places where
Yes.
people play football. You
Yes.
know, they didn't go to places where people play hockey. And you
Yes.
just you see a lot of that. And now the NFL is like, well, what if we just go to Africa and get people? Because
Go
again,
to the source.
yeah, because in the United States, like public schools for so long have been the source of so much talent, but public schools are under attack and they're running out of money to put into football. And there's schools that used to be really good at football that don't have football anymore because football is extremely expensive. And instead of, and the NFL can't tell the government that they got to invest in public schools. So they got to find some other way to sort of incubate talent, low cost talent. Yeah.
It's so sad. It's so sad. But you know what? We are the architects of our own problems. So we will deal with it. So let's look at borders and bloodlines. So how do these themes connect to the larger conversation around race and migration in North America today?
So my story, like a lot of
Yeah.
stories from Black people that are anchored in big northern cities, it is also a great migration story because my grandparents' generation sort of straddled the Great Migration. So of my 4 grandparents, I got 2 that were born up north, one born in Chicago, one born in New Jersey, and I got 2 born in Arkansas. And the generation before that, everybody's from down south. And it was, people who lived in Texas or in Arkansas or South Carolina, and either were driven from where they lived by lack of opportunity or by racism, or they looked up at Chicago, looked at Pittsburgh, and saw an opportunity and went.
Yeah.
And so one of the big political social issues in Chicago right now is what to do with migrants. Because what's been happening is, migrants will make it to Texas. A lot of people from Venezuela, Colombia, Mexico, and they'll make it to Texas, and the Texas governor just puts them on buses and sends them to Chicago. And there's sadly, a lot of backlash from Black Americans in Chicago saying, well, why is the city accommodating these people? They're not from here. They're migrants. But if you're Black in Chicago, chances are you were descended of a migrant, right? Like the Black population in Chicago exploded between World War I and World War II with people from Mississippi, people from Arkansas, people from Texas. We all migrated. My folks migrated. So who are we now to look at the next group of migrants and say, you can't do what we did? That's how we got here. And Black migrants really made Chicago the cultural force it is.
Yes.
And so now who are we to tell the next group of migrants, well, you can't come here? But we understand what the deal is. And it's sad to me, but this is also the first time in American history, because the Republicans, especially in this election cycle, they identified that crack and they played on it. And they really played to this sense of nativism in a lot of Black Americans to turn them against migrants, to turn them against Kamala Harris, because Kamala Harris's folks are from abroad. Yeah. And it occurred to me that this is the first time in history that white Americans have invited Black Americans to their little xenophobic party. Because typically what happens in the US is Black Americans are in whatever city. Immigrants come to that city, and if they're not Black, they figure out very quickly that the racial hierarchy places them above Black people. It does not matter how little time you spent in the country, you're better than the Black people. As I said, as I wrote in the book, when my mom was growing up in Chicago, and these people would come over from Poland or Hungary or whatever, and could not make a whole sentence in English, but they knew how to say dirty nigger.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's typically what happens.
Yes.
But now this time the Republicans have said, well, we're going to make immigration an issue. And we don't care if Black people vote for us. We ain't doing anything for them anyway. We are not going to improve Black people's lives. But what we can do is peel some Black voters away from Kamala Harris by saying Harris and Biden let in the migrants, and the migrants are taking your jobs. We need to turn you against them. And this is the first time this has ever happened, because usually whatever new, but it also happens because these migrants are not white, right? Because if these migrants were coming in from
any of the European countries, it wouldn't be
yes,
that way.
Yes, like the Ukrainian refugees, right? No one enlisted the Black people to go
Yes.
complain about the Ukrainian refugees, but you
Yes.
enlist the black people to complain about the Colombians and the Venezuelans and
Yes.
the Haitians. And so, we are all descended of migrants. Like the middle passing was a forced migration, and then the Great Migration. Now we did not come to Canada as part of a bigger migration. We just were a family that moved to Canada. But again, these are all great migration stories, and I wrote it so that people could view it through that lens. And the border is as much a character in the story, as the people are, because the border, we crossed the border. That was a big turning point in my family's history. And the border separates the factions of my family, right? One of the things about my dad's mom is that she's still in Chicago and just resents the fact that we all live in Canada. And so all these things matter, and all they all come together. And the bloodlines too, because one of the things I wanted to make sure I did, I think a lot of analysis about being Black in Canada focuses on life at the business end of racism. There's always time to talk about that. And Blackness as a function of what happens to you because you are Black, and the disadvantages you face because you're Black. Okay. And also because African American pop culture is so pervasive, there's this idea that anyone can sort of just pick up what it means to be Black, because I can just turn on the TV and see Kendrick Lamar at the Super Bowl, or see, watch BET for an hour and be like, okay, I got it. Not even Kendrick, because Kendrick is very intentional about the Blackness he portrays, but just like I can watch a Drake video and okay, I get it. And I want to make sure that, at least as far as I'm concerned, anyone who wants to know my story, who reads my story, is going to come away understanding that for me and for mine, like, Blackness is not just a function of the things that happen to me, the bad things that happen to me because I'm Black. It's not just a function of turning on BET and just absorbing Black pop culture. And African American culture is not Black pop culture. There's overlap. Black pop culture comes from a broader and deeper African American culture, but the broader and deeper African American culture still matters. And so I really wanted to frame and discuss Black identity as a function of heritage, and not just. And the thing is, when you're not talking about African Americans, people get it. Again, people just want to talk about African Americans like we are some group of people that uniquely have no heritage, and that everyone feels like our culture is something they can cherry pick from. But if any other group of Black people, and we're talking about it, you say, yeah, I want to talk about my Trinidadianness as a function of heritage, the generations we have in Trinidad. They're like, okay, cool, I get it. Tell me more. But when I talk about my Black American heritage, about as a function of the things we've been through, the generations we have in the United States, people are like, are you sure? No, you don't ask me if I'm sure. I'm telling you.
Well, that's true. That's true. As I really I think what your book and this conversation is highlighting to me personally is also part of my ignorance, in the sense that I I knew about Black Americans coming through to the U.S. So, for lack of a better example, Uncle Sam's cabin.
Uncle Tom's Cabin, yes.
Uncle Tom's
In
cabin.
Dresden,
Sorry, in
Ontario. Yeah.
Dresden. Yeah,
Yes.
yes. Okay, so I know the story. I visited because I have a place in Chatham. That is what drove me to Chatham, actually.
Okay. Well, I haven't been to Uncle Tom's Cabin, but I've been to North Buxton, to the
Okay.
historic site.
Yes, yes,
And it's funny talking about, when you talk about people that are cousins, and like
yes,
peoples that are cousins. So like, yeah, the Black folks in Southwestern Ontario, like,
yes,
I feel a kinship with them because they are
yes,
descended of Black Americans.
yes,
But like
yes,
the woman
yes.
who was running, her name was Sharon Prince, who was running. She's retired from there now, but she looked just like my mom and my aunt. Like, if they had another sister,
Yes,
she would have looked just like
yes,
Sharon Prince. But again, it's our people are cousins. So
yes,
big picture, we're cousins. So it
yes.
goes.
And so that is where my mind was. And also, when you talk about generations of, say, African American Blacks in Canada, I had met this purely white girl in
Mhm.
Owen Sound.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
I bet I know. I bet I know where this is headed. Go ahead.
yes. And when you go to the roots
Yep.
of the first migrant people that came,
Yep.
There sits this black man, this black woman
Yep.
as their ancestry.
Yep.
And she's blonde and blue-eyed.
Yep.
It's like those are my great 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 grandparents.
Yep. Yep.
It's
Yeah.
like,
You see a white person and you're like, why is your last name Washington?
yes.
There's not a lot of white Washingtons, and they're like, oh, wait a minute, your great 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 grandpa.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And even within my family right now, my brother married a white woman, had
Mhm.
3 boys. These boys have married. One is married to another white woman, had
Mhm.
children. So you go from quote unquote half caste mulatto,
Yeah.
whatever, to purely white kids.
Yes.
But their last name is Poku.
Yeah.
So,
And so at some point, someone's going to be like, you're going to have to explain this last name to me because.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You have to explain this last name because we don't know any Pokus that are very, very white.
Yes.
But that is the trajectory of how the world is going and how families are going to be like in the nearest future because we're mixing. And these Pokus can trace right back to, right back to the Ashanti region in Ghana, where my dad is from, if they so wish and desire.
Yes.
So
it is nuts. And that's the thing. Like, I met a lady yesterday, it was a white looking woman, and was talking to me about my book. And she said, yeah, I got family on both sides of the border. My family's like yours. She's like, she's a little bit older than me. But her dad is a black guy from Virginia, and then he moved up here to go to school, married a white woman. But I guess the dad, I have not seen the dad. I imagine the dad is also pretty fair skinned.
Yes.
Because the woman, if she did not tell me she was black, I would not have suspected it.
Yes.
And only because she told me she was black, I could do a sort of a secondary scan for her facial features, and see a little bit of a curl to her hair, but just a bit, But yeah, those folks will just jump out. They'll surprise you, man.
Yes, they do. And then that brings out, what does it mean to be black? When you have...
You're asking me right now?
It begs the question, what does it mean to be black? When you look at my skin tone, your skin tone, and the skin tone you are describing of her, and it's deep.
Yeah, and it's also it's a function of a combination of genotype, phenotype, and then how that person identifies.
And culture, yeah.
And people get mad at me when I say this, but I only say it because it's true. And again, you take it outside the context of African Americanness, and you get it. Like, some people are blacker than other people culturally. Yes. And if you disagree with that, it's because you don't think Black Americans have any culture. Black Americans have culture. And so that's controversial if I put it in the context of African Americanness. But in the context of any other culture in the Black diaspora, you get it. So, like, the kids I grew up with, their parents are from Barbados. Are those kids as Bajan as their parents are? No, they're not. No, because they grew up here. Their parents grew up in Bridgetown.
Yes.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
I am Black. I'm 100% Black. I'm not as Black as my parents because my parents came from the South Side of Chicago.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so we don't have to pretend, that at a cultural level, everybody's the same. And the people, because what I do find is like a lot of bad faith actors who are like tangentially connected to their Blackness. Can also use that to sort of position themselves as spokespeople for Black people when their real job is just to scold and to undermine Black people. Right? Like, that would be a Candace Owens. Or like Kelly Holmes used to be on CNN. She was like one of her parents was from Zimbabwe and one was white and American, but she was very conservative, right? But she fits the range of phenotypes that we call Black. She's within that range. All right.
She's speaking for all of us.
Yes. And then telling white people that all of us are deficient, lazy, blah, blah, blah.
Experience.
Yeah. And just not connected culturally. But then when you point out you're not connected culturally, then they get mad at you. How dare you diminish my Black? Yeah, well, I'm doing it. Because my parents could do it to me because I'm not from the South Side of Chicago. They are. Yeah. And it's a level of immersion in African American culture that they had growing up that I did not have growing up. Like, I had it in my house, but they had it everywhere. There's a difference.
Yeah.
And so we shouldn't have to pretend there's no difference, but we do. But again, that opens a lot of space for like the worst bad faith actors to come in, and position themselves as people that speak for all of us. Yes. And all they're doing is looking out for themselves and really could care less about what happens to the rest of us. And again, but I just don't. I'm just sort of secure enough in who I am that it doesn't bother me for someone to be like, "Well, you're not as black as your Uncle Ken." No, Uncle Ken is the blackest guy I know. There ain't too many people black as him. That's fine. And again, he grew up on the west side of Chicago. I grew up here. There's a reason for that. Just like you're not as Jamaican as your parents are. That's
Yes.
just what it is. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with that. It's just a function of being, first
Different
generation in a new country.
generations.
Yeah.
That's true. For instance, myself, between myself and my dad, even though I came here very early in my 20s and went to
Mhm.
university here, from high school to university is a different experience and understanding of Canadian
Yes.
culture because of the people that, for instance, I immersed myself with earlier on doing spoken word on the stages downtown
Mhm.
Toronto. Now, so it gave me a different insight into being black in Canada, which my dad
Yes.
didn't have because he was older, lived
Yeah.
somewhere else. Yes. Now, my children are different in a sense that they were born here. They had a 2 or 3 year immersion in Ghana, came back. They've forgotten most of it. But
Mhm.
what the best they got out of it is still speaking the language
Mhm.
somewhat, even though it's upside down and somersaults most days. I say,
Yes.
I'll take it as it is and we'll still work on it.
Yes.
Yes. My daughter came to me one day and said, Mommy, I want to speak pidgin English. I said, why? Because she has some Nigerian friends in school who speak pidgin English and she wants to speak pidgin English so that they
Mhm.
can code switch. And it's like, oh, okay. And she's coming to me because I speak pidgin English and I cut across, so I should teach her. And
Yeah.
the question is, how do I teach you pidgin English? Because I picked up.
Yeah.
I picked up as a kid living in Nigeria with other children, and for some reason it got stuck in my head. And
Mhm.
meeting other Nigerians here, I realized that within my profession, when the person comes and is Nigerian, I can code switch very easily to
Yes.
yeah. So it's like, how do I teach that? But what I'm driving at is the importance of that cultural nuance that she wants
Yes.
to learn. She doesn't have what I have.
That's also what fascinates me about different uh, Black diasporic languages and dialects is that they defy formal teaching. And like, you can't go to a class and learn
Mm,
African American vernacular English, and they could probably teach it to you, and you would still sound like a robot
you
speaking.
gotta live it.
You got the only way to learn any of these languages properly is immersion. That's it. And you sink or swim, and that's it. And that's beautiful to me because that's like as hard as these AI models try to sound like Black people, they can't do it. They can't. You cannot replicate it.
And
There's,
their culture and
we
their
create codes that
nuances.
yeah, and we as Black people just continue creating codes that no computer can crack, and I think that's awesome.
We
And
are
again, that's
something
also
else, eh?
yeah, that's also why again, that's also why I don't get in these diaspora war arguments because I focus on the things that we do well and the things that like the things we have in common. Not to say that the things we have in common that have a different spin everywhere you go.
Mm-hmm,
That's what's
mm-hmm.
fascinating to me. I'm going
Yes.
to fight with you over this. I'm not going to fight
Yeah.
with you over the way you speak English versus the way they speak Creole. No, 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 no. I want to hear it. Tell me how you speak it in your country. Tell me how
Yes.
you say it. But
Yes.
again, and it just anywhere you go, there's Black people speaking a form of a language that some computer is trying to figure out, and they never will.
Like years ago, somebody told me I should speak a good, proper English, and at that time, I thought I was a reader. I was working in some factory. Every time you see me
Mhm.
with a book reading and whatnot. And this girl, who in my view did not even speak English properly, is telling me to speak proper English because she couldn't understand what I was referring to. Because at that time I sounded more British than
Oh,
I do a lot of what I call street English these days.
yeah,
Break it
yeah, yeah,
down. Let's just go. No formality.
yeah, exactly.
And she told me to speak proper English. And one Ghanaian woman whose broken English raised into her. What do you mean she speaks better English than you? Do you know English? It's like, I
Yeah, your
think
English is fine. I understand everything you're saying.
I say, if you don't understand my English, get an English translator. You get an
Exactly.
it's like that's how I deal with it these days.
Yes.
If you don't understand me, get an English translator. But I realize that nuances, people get lost in the nuances that comes out in
Mhm.
my in my speech.
Yes.
And it's like, you know what? I am not even going to break it down and whatnot. Somebody else will explain it to you.
Exactly.
Lessons and legacy. Whoo.
Okay.
So, my fighting family. Your family's history is really, really filled with a lot of rich and complex stories. At least, what I don't.
It gets spicier. Just keep
It
reading.
gets spicier. Okay.
Wait till you see my dad's dad. That that's a lot.
I realize that man is a troublemaker.
My mom's dad.
Claude.
Yes, he's a troublemaker. What I'm saying is, in about 2 chapters from now, you will also see my dad's dad. He's a lot.
So the grandmother. Okay. So
so this whole book, my dad's mother, she's a widow. So my dad's dad died like in the early 70s.
Oh.
But he makes sort of a posthumous appearance in a chapter called Chicago 1992. But it's a lot. Like I said, the book's about to get, each chapter from here gets spicier.
I got it. I got it. So let's say, was there anything surprising, like whilst you were writing this book, anything unexpected that you discovered about your roots? Any hidden secrets that came up?
Not necessarily, only because so much of this stuff was stuff that we would talk about in the family anyway. Again, because my parents, like, they each were pretty adamant about like making sure we knew where we came from and where they came from and where their folks came from. One of the things that, well, I'll give you an example. And for the people that haven't read the book yet, it's a bit of a spoiler, but there's a part where a mob enforcer, like a guy that works for the mafia, is a very well-known mafia enforcer in Chicago.
Yes.
Offers to kill.
Yes.
Offers to kill my grandparents' next door neighbors.
Yes.
Okay. That is a true story. Okay. So what happened now was my grandfather used to tell that story, and he would never, for him, it was all about the punchline. He would say, yeah. And then the guy said, I'll go take care of them. He would never specify who that person was. Okay. And my grandpa, when he would retell the story, he just wanted to get to the punchline where and he never even said the guy was like a hitman specifically. He just said he was a mob guy who used to come listen to him play music. So I was talking to my mom about it, and my mom was like, no. That was not just a guy. It's like, that was a guy named Marshall Caifano. She's like, go look up Marshall Caifano. Look him up. And he wasn't just a mob guy. He was like the best known hitman in Chicago of the 1950s and 60s. He was to the point where, like, so if my grandfather talking to him, he would have known exactly who this guy was and what he did for a living. So when this guy who everyone knows kills people for a living comes to you and says, oh yeah, I'll kill your next door neighbors. Like,
I'll take care of them for you.
Yeah. So you don't know if he's serious or if it's a joke, but both of them are scary in their own way. You know? So like, that was a big surprise. Or like to learn that, my dad's dad was actually grew up in Arkansas, because his birth certificate says Mississippi, but it does not say a city, it just says Mississippi. And but he actually grew up in Arkansas, in a part of Arkansas that's close to Mississippi, close to Memphis. It's like where Mississippi and Arkansas and Tennessee, where they all meet. So stuff like that was fascinating. And then you just learn a lot about yourself and your ability to put all these stories together, and then seeing what they wind up saying about you. And it's funny. And to me, that's also the best way to hit the target. Because if I had said to myself, I'm self-consciously aiming to write a story about Black American resilience and write a story that's a love letter to Black America, the story wouldn't have read as well. It's just the fact that I told these stories and you hit that target along the way. So like all these things that, like the big message you're looking to send in a story, you send it a lot better if you don't try to send it. Just write the best story and that message will come out along the way,
I will tell you what your book have done for me. So about 2 years ago, I started writing on my lessons I learned from my mother. The reason why I am who I am.
Ooh, that's what my wife's book is about.
Oh.
Yeah.
I got to interview her.
Yeah, no, she would. Listen, you think I like to talk? Wait till you meet my wife. I'll put you guys in touch.
Thank you. And like you saying, I realized that a whole lot of me comes from her,
Hmm.
her, her mother, my grandmother, my great grandmother, that
Yes.
I didn't even think about.
Yep.
And I was going at it quite differently. But when I started reading your book, it showed me a gap that I hadn't thought about.
Hmm.
That I'm concentrated so much on me and a few of my mom that I'm not pulling out her story properly and my
Yes.
grandmother's story properly or my great grandmother, the narratives that have been passed orally to me.
Yes.
So
Yes. 100%.
so thank you.
Because this is the thing, like we think about memoirs and biographies as just a story of my life, and then whatever happened before me is sort of incidental. And that was one of the other points. Uh, I wanted to make. I wound up, but again, you make that point best by not self-consciously trying to make that point. You make it that point best by just telling the story, and you'll make the point along the way. But one of the points I'm also trying to make in this book is that we are all the product. We think of ourselves as self-made, and we are, but we also the product of like decisions that people made before we were
Yes.
born,
Yes.
things that happened to people before we were born, decisions that were made for other people
Yes.
before we were born. Because so me,
Yes.
the only reason my parents decided to have kids is because they came to Canada. The only reason they came to Canada is because my mom's parents were already here. The only reason Canada was ever a possibility for my family is because my mom's dad was a musician. He got booked here. But the only reason he became a musician is because his parents, when he was 10 years old, made a very sexist decision. He had an 18-year-old sister who was getting ready to go to college.
Yes.
She wanted to become a librarian. My grandfather was 10 years old. Well, he wasn't my grandfather back then. He was a 10-year-old boy named Claude Jones, had just started piano lessons. And the parents said, we cannot afford both. We can't afford to send our daughter to college and keep our son in piano lessons.
Piano.
And most of us would be like, okay, we'll send the daughter to college because that's
Yeah.
what's more urgent. My great grandparents said, no, our son, he might become a professional piano player. We're going to invest in him. And our daughter, she can go clean white people's houses for a living because too bad for you.
Some man will come and marry her off.
Too bad for you. You're a girl. You can either get married or just go get a job. And that's that. Right. And so much of what we have now, we owe to my Aunt Edith. She didn't make a sacrifice. She had her future sacrificed.
Yes.
By her parents, And so that's what I mean when I say, like, we all think we're self-made, but like there's all these things that none of us have any control over. Like if my great-grandparents had made a different decision and said, our daughter is going to college, our son is just going to become a teacher or whatever, but he's not going to become a musician, then everybody's life after that is very different.
Yes.
And so that's what I mean. Yes. And that's what you're getting at.
Yes.
And it's hard. And it's hard for you to really understand like your own story until you start to figure out like what some of these stories are.
Yes. Yes. That you're right on point. It's like, oh my goodness. I'm so glad we had this conversation. I think at this point in time, I'll say selfishly that this conversation was for me.
That was a lot of fun, man.
Maybe you wrote this book for the world, but the intention, I claim my part in it.
Good. No, but
for me to learn. Yes.
I tell people this all the time. Like that's the power of memoir, is that you read and you learn something very specific about a person and a place and a period of time, and maybe that stuff has nothing to do with you, and this is all new stuff you're learning.
Yes.
But then you also, in the life of someone who's the details of their life are nothing like yours, you still wind up seeing your own experiences, reflected and magnified. And so that's the power of memoir, right?
You're
from Ghana.
Story.
I'm from Chicago, and like a lot of this stuff is very different. But like, the stuff about meddling family members, like you get that, right? The stuff about like really having to understand what makes your parents tick before you can really understand your own story. Like, that has nothing to do with where I'm coming from specifically. Like, you could be white, you could be Asian, it don't matter. That's still one of the things that helps you unlock the story, So that's.
Sometimes when you're running away from being like your mother, you end up more like her. You hear yourself, it's like, is it my mother speaking or it's me?
Well, this is like, you'll read it in a few chapters from now, like, that's the decision I had to make in terms of whether or not to pursue music seriously. It was like, I did a little saxophone in grade 7, grade 8, but like in my family, there's a lot of musicians, and every generation, one person says, I'm going to do music. And then all the older musicians, they pull the person aside and say, don't do it. You don't want this. This life is too stressful, blah, 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 blah. So here I am at like 13, 14. I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do music. It's too stressful. And now here I am as a writer, and it's every bit as stressful
as music.
There's no difference. There is no difference. And here I was trying to avoid the drama, that my grandpa and my uncle warned me about.
But there's still drama. It's life full of drama. It's so I just recently realized that I could paint. And as my son said, you do abstract painting. I had no idea. I was doing it for stress relief.
Yeah, no, that's a good skill to have, man.
But now I do painting. That's not my painting, by the way. I bought it.
Okay.
Yes. But I figured if I could do it, then I'm not going to pay anybody. I'm going to get a canvas and stress relief on the canvas.
Exactly.
And things that my dad didn't do, which is he wrote, but he didn't publish. Yes. I did my poetry and published it.
Good.
Yes. And so there are a lot of things that creativity is within the family, but it's not explored outside much. I think I have pushed that boundary of that creativity to bring it out. Now I see my children. My son is doing graphic design in college, and so I see that. And my daughter is also all over in music, graphic, in painting, in trying to write stories and everything. So they are all. It's like, okay, you guys continue.
Exactly.
Continue. The other generation didn't do it, but because I kind of pushed it, others are trying to, also push it further. And I hope they do better than I did. Yes. So if there is one or two lessons or a message you hope readers will take from My Fighting Family, what would it be?
One, don't be that person. See what I'm saying? The person that jumps into every family fight, starts it, makes it worse. As you read the book, again, I do my best to have great empathy for my mom's dad and my dad's mom, but they were petty, troublemaking grudge holders. They were.
But without them too, this story wouldn't have been spicy.
Yes, so they helped make the story go, but our lives are a lot more peaceful. Miserable. They both passed away. Because now, like, if two people get into a fight, the two people can also solve it without some third person coming in and making it worse,
Yes.
That's the big lesson. Don't be that person, right? Yes. Be the person that solves the fights. Don't be the person that's just, like, making everything worse all the time. Don't be that person.
Okay.
Two is, again, whether it's in the books you read or if you are a writer or just someone who thinks about, how you came to be the person you are, like, give some thought to the things that happened that you could not control, that put you in the position you're in now. Like another thing, like you'll read at the end of the book, like my mom's dad, he was in the army during World War II. He was getting ready to go to basic training, and he didn't want to go. He didn't know how to shoot guns. He was not built to be in a trench, and he's not a guy that liked to listen to people. He knew everything, right? You've read enough. He knows everything about everything. It's like, so for him to like be in the army taking orders, it was never going to work very well. So what happened was he was getting ready to go to basic training. He's outside Union Station in Chicago. So the way he would tell the story is that he just happened to step off the curb as a taxi was driving by, and it broke his foot. And so then he couldn't get on this troop train and go to basic training. He had to go to the hospital. They put a cast on his leg, and then when he finally winds up in the army, because he got this injury, they put him to work in an office because he knew how to type. That's sort of how he, right?
Bypassed it.
Yeah. So my mom is like, that was not an accident. My mom is convinced that he saw that cab coming. And he saw an opportunity to get himself injured because he knew he was not going to go and take orders from people, Well,
I'm not going to die for you.
Yeah. But either way, like, if he doesn't get his foot broken and he winds up like fighting someplace, everyone's life is different.
Yes.
After that.
That's
so there's always
true.
These things. So you always have to acknowledge the role of like luck and chance and just these decisions that other people made that you got nothing to do with you that have shaped who you are. And just in terms of like, it was very important for me to sort of add my family's story to this canon of Black Canadian literature, because there aren't not a lot of Black Americans here, but there are people here like us. I come across us sometimes in public, and I really want to be able to tell a story about, especially because, again, so many different types of people in every country in the world borrow so heavily from Black American culture, right? And I wanted to really add something to the conversation that comes straight from the source. So you're not borrowing this from anywhere. I'm not borrowing it from anywhere. This is what I lived. I'm not co-opting somebody's culture. I'm not culture vulturing it. None of this stuff. Like, this is, and so the things that y'all think y'all understand, you can actually understand it from someone who really lived it and understands the depth and the history and the heritage and the culture behind the pop culture that y'all love to borrow so much. So it's really important for me to get that done. And again, and I say this a lot too, this book is a love letter to Black America from across the border. Because I say this all the time. I say this in a lot of interviews that, the saying, like, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. Black America gets a lot of flattery via imitation because so many different people in so many different places in the world want to imitate how we dress, how we walk, how we talk, how we rap, how we sing, all of this. A lot of imitation, but not a lot of authentic love. So I want to send a love.
They only want what you have.
Yes.
But they don't want you that you are producing that.
Yes. So I wanted to send some authentic, heartfelt love to Black America. Because if nobody else appreciates what it means to be Black and American outside the United States and inside the United States, I appreciate it. And I appreciate the folks that I come from, the folks that made me, and the folks that do so much of the cultural heavy lifting almost everywhere in the world. So that's what I want to do.
Beautiful. So what's next for you?
Let me see. A whole lot of freelance writing, as I was saying to you offline. I got a bunch of stuff coming up for CBC. Got something coming that's in the West End, Phoenix today. Today's February 22nd. So so this publishes after, like, if you're out in the West End, you see the West End, Phoenix, a story about two boxers from Mexico. It's called They Came to Fight. That's my story. Got something coming up in the Houston Chronicle, because the thing about, again, being a self-employed writer is that you just got to be active everywhere all the time at once. Got a few book signings coming up. When? Oh, yeah. And by the time this comes out, when is it coming out?
Next Friday.
Okay. So
when is your book signing?
Oh, I just finished one on February 21st.
That was yesterday.
Okay, so hold on, because I have to double check the date, because there's a big announcement coming up soon. Oh, so this is coming out next Friday?
Yes.
The 28th?
Yes.
Okay, so by then, all right. So yes, so by Friday 28th, it will be public that I'm doing a bunch of stuff in the springtime at the Festival of Literary Diversity in Brampton. So that news doesn't become official. And don't go talking to anyone about it between now and tomorrow, because that news does not become official public information until Sunday the 23rd. But yeah, it's a big deal, because that's the biggest literary festival of its type in Canada.
So do I cut this part out?
Keep an eye on Instagram, because the schedule they sent me says that their announcement of my participation in the event comes out on Sunday, the 23rd.
Tomorrow.
Yeah. So if this comes out the 28th, we're good.
Okay.
Because the way I like any place where I'm appearing, like, I like to publicize it early.
Okay.
So yeah, in first weekend in May, I'll be at the Fold Festival of Literary Diversity in Brampton.
Yes.
September in Chicago, I'll be at the Southside Lit Fest. That's really important to me, because it's that's right on the South Side of Chicago, and so many of the stories and anecdotes in this book take place in the same neighborhood that this literary festival takes place.
Yes.
So said all that to say this, as a self-employed writer, you got to stay busy. You're always doing some of everything, and in between the springtime book festival and the late summer book festival, probably some more stuff will come up in between, because you're always sort of working on that stuff. And I have been, like, networking with other Black authors to see how we can support each other with smaller events. So to call back to what we talked about at the very top of this conversation. So much of the corporate world now is like somewhere between indifferent to what Black folks need and what Black folks can deliver, and just like doing the most cowardly thing and tossing us overboard because Donald Trump's throwing a temper tantrum. And they can do that if they want, but like, listen, if we as different types of Black people, we're not resourceful and resilient and smart and reactive and adaptable, we wouldn't be here right now. Right? So we're here for a reason, and the things that got us here, the tools that got us here are the tools that are going to keep us here and keep us pushing forward. And like, yeah, I just made that decision. I'm not letting Donald Trump stop me from telling my story, stop me from helping other people tell their stories, stop us from building community, because this is ain't nobody coming to save us, man. Donald Trump, nobody. We got to do it ourselves.
And on the flip side, I do believe with everything that we deem negative, there's actually a positive to it. This is the drive for us to be grounded in our story and tell our stories the more.
Well, look at these white Canadians finally discovering like some authentic sense of patriotism, because the specter of annexation now is looming. Because all white Canadians have been telling us and telling each other for the last 3 years is that Canada sucks, Canada's broken, because you listen to Pierre Poilievre. That's all he's ever told people. Now Donald Trump says, all right, well, let me swallow you up. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, I actually love this place. I'm gonna tell you, you should have acted like it the last 5 years. If this is what it takes to get you off your butt, and serve the country the way you actually should, because you claim to love this place. All right, then let's do it.
Now you see proudly Canadian everywhere. Proudly Canadian. It's like now you understand that your healthcare is not as crappy as you think, because now if the US takes over cash and carry, and many of us don't have that kind of money.
Most people don't. People don't.
Yes.
What is the number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States?
Healthcare.
Medical debt. Exactly.
Medical debt. Yes. And this is what I say. For us, okay, let's say we think healthcare is free. It is not free, because we pay the high taxes. That is how our healthcare gets covered. A day I work in a rural hospital. A day there, admission is about $2,300 or $2,400 a night. In the big hospitals, it's about $2,700. So if you spend 2 days in the hospital, look at how you cover it. And why do I know this? Because I got inquisitive with people coming to have their babies here. What are the financial charges when they pay, when it's broken down by the finance department? It's like, wow. To get an epidural ranges from between 1,000 to 1,700, and the anesthesiologist will prefer cash. Exactly. So all these things are there, but you and I live here, so we think it's free. We don't respect it and whatnot. But if it changes to cash and carry, I'll have to probably mortgage or remortgage my house to get healthcare.
Not to mention the fact that for regular people, the taxes are not that much lower, if at all. Like, the tax savings always accrue to the richest people. The normal people we will always still be paying taxes. So you go to U.S. style private healthcare, the taxes you're paying, that does not go down at all, but your medical bills skyrocket. But you can't. It's tough to convince people of that until it happens to them. Much like a lot of these people that voted for Trump now, and now they're losing their jobs because he's cutting U.S. aid. He's firing all these government workers, and they said, "Oh, we didn't think it would happen to us." Well, now it's happened to you, and this is what people tried to warn you about. So people tried to protect you from.
He's cutting U.S. aid. Because around the world, it is food sovereignty for many African countries to pick up and work it, because the U.S. aid did not help Africa. It did the opposite of creating dependency. So yes, on foods that have been, or GMO foods that are not authentic to Africa.
Got you.
We need to, for instance, our own corn or maize, grow the damn thing.
Yes.
Grow the damn thing, have your silos or whatnot to keep the surpluses or excesses
Yes.
and give it to your population.
Yes.
Many of them are not GMOs because we still have the old, the natural seeds, not
Yep.
these agriculturally. If I didn't come to Canada, I didn't even know what was a sweet corn. I never knew sweet corn. I just knew corn that you chew. You
Yeah.
exercise your, not this corn with sugar.
Oh,
Anyways, that
it's
is
that's everywhere over here. But also they grow it that way because because the more sugar it has in it, the easier it is to make other products out of it. So when they want to
Yes.
make like high fructose corn syrup,
Yes,
or when they want to make ethanol for your car, the sweet corn.
does it. So
Yes.
for USAID not being, it is time for Africa and many of its places to actually grow its own food, authentic and indigenous to the continent.
Yes.
My brother from another mother. Now you've given me the African laugh. It
There
comes
we go.
from the belly.
Yes.
Yes. Morgan, this has been an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your journey with us. And
Thank you for reaching out to me, because again, you could have emailed any author out there, but you emailed me, and I appreciate that.
no, I looked my fighting family. I say, this one get juice. Let's see where the juice is coming from.
Like I said, it's about every chapter after this one gets a little bit juicier.
Juicier. Okay.
Yes.
So where can my listeners connect with you and find your book?
Okay, so you can find me on basically every social media platform except Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
And my handle's always the same. It's at Morgan P. Campbell.
Yes.
So TikTok, I'm mostly active on Instagram, LinkedIn, Threads, Blue Sky, Twitter. I'm at Morgan P. Campbell. My website, bymorgancampbell.com. That's where I do some of the writing that I can't fit into like other publications.
Yes.
And then, so you can buy the book basically anywhere online. If you're in North America, I highly, 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 highly encourage people to buy it from an independent bookstore. Like here in Toronto, there's a different book list, Black-owned bookstore right there, right on Bathurst.
Knowledge Bookstore.
Yep.
In Brampton.
Yeah.
Now Valley Bookstore.
Yeah. So you can always like default to Chapters and Indigo, and the Indigo people around here, they've been good to me.
Yes.
But they also just get so much more corporate support than your average indie. That I always, encourage people to use independent bookstores. In the US, for the most part, you have to order it online. But like, finally, 13 months in, I had a breakthrough with the publisher and got them to like really take this seriously. The fact that there's an audience for this book in the US, so the US distribution is going to improve throughout the year. But again, order it through a Black independent if you can. One bookstore that I have a relationship with in Chicago is called Call and Response Books. So if you're anywhere in the US, they will ship to you. And that's the one store that I know for a fact in the US has my book like in the store on their shelves.
Okay.
Everyone else, you kind of got to order it online. And then internationally, I would guess, Amazon's always there. But again, Jeffrey Bezos has enough of our money. Like when in doubt, just search my book's title and Penguin Random House, go straight to the Penguin Random House website. And then on there, it has different buying options. But, support indie bookstores if you can, to the extent that it's feasible.
Yes.
And then like the audiobook, you can get on Spotify, or you can get any place where they sell audiobooks, you can get the audiobook, and that the audiobook is cheaper.
Yes.
Because you do have to think about people's budgets.
Yes, you do. But I'm a tactile person, so I always want to read it. It's under my pillow. I look at it, read it,
good.
Make notes with my yellow sticky.
Good.
What? No,
it's gonna get spicier. It gets a lot spicier after this.
That means I'm not working tonight. I will read it.
Good. And then make sure everyone give it a 5-star rating wherever you read. So whether it's on Goodreads, Indigo, Amazon, give it that 5-star rating. Because the thing is, as organic as we try to be, we're still beholden to the algorithms. And all the algorithm cares about is if this thing is getting 5-star ratings. So it's very strange. Your book could stink, but if people are giving it 5-star ratings, the algorithm likes it.
Oh, guys, that is it for today. On the Nana Yayabwa podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, please do not forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. I have had with me Morgan Campbell, author of My Fighting Family, Borders and Bloodlines, and the Battles That Made Us. So this is the cover of the book. You cannot miss it. And as he said, it's almost everywhere. Google his name, Morgan P. Campbell, and it pops up.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Everybody stay safe out there.